During the division of assets, my daughter said loudly to her siblings, "The old lady won't last long. Better if she gets nothing, just a spot in the nursing home." I lowered my head and smiled. The next day, they all received a letter. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." My daughter Claire's words cut through the air like a knife. I lowered my head and smiled, though inside my heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces. 64 years on this earth, and never had I felt so utterly worthless as I did in that moment, sitting at my own dining room table, surrounded by the children I had raised with every ounce of love in my body. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, George's pride and joy. My late husband had been gone for nearly 2 years now, and the time had finally come to sell our family home and divide the assets. I thought it would be a simple discussion. I was wrong. "Claire," my eldest son Michael interjected, though his voice lacked any real conviction. "That's a bit harsh." Claire rolled her eyes, tossing her perfectly highlighted hair over her shoulder. At 39, she looked every bit the successful marketing executive she was: designer clothes, manicured nails, and not a hint of compassion in her eyes. "It's practical," she countered. "Mom can't take care of herself anymore. Look at her. She's frail, forgetful. The money from the house would be wasted on her at this point." I wasn't frail. I wasn't forgetful. I had arthritis in my knees that made stairs difficult and occasionally misplaced my reading glasses. Somehow, in Claire's mind, this had translated to complete incompetence. "What do you think, Mom?" asked David, my youngest, in a rare moment of directly addressing me. At 35, he still couldn't look me in the eye when money was being discussed. I cleared my throat, my hands clasped tightly together to hide their trembling. "I thought perhaps we could split the proceeds. I would take a smaller portion for a modest apartment, and the rest could be divided among you three," Claire scoffed. "And then what happens when that money runs out? When you need care? It all falls on us anyway. What about the 30 years I'd spent caring for them? The college tuitions I'd helped pay after George lost his job? The down payment for Claire's first condo? The bail money for David's DUI? The loan to Michael for his failed restaurant venture that he never repaid? Your mother raised you," I said quietly, referring to myself in the third person as if I were already gone. "She took care of you when you were sick, helped you with homework, attended every game and recital." "Oh God, here we go with the guilt trip," Claire interrupted, checking her watch. "Look, I have a meeting in an hour. Can we just decide what we're doing with the house? I vote we sell it, split the money between us three, and find Mom a nice facility that takes Medicare." Michael and David exchanged uncomfortable glances but didn't protest. Their silence was all the agreement Claire needed. "Good. It's settled then," she said, standing up and gathering her designer purse. "I'll call my realtor friend. She can list the house by the end of the week. I have 30 days to move out, according to the divorce agreement with your father," I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. Claire looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "Divorce? Dad's been dead for 2 years, Mom." "I know that," I said quietly. It was a joke, but no one laughed. No one even smiled. Instead, they looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience, as if my small attempt at humor was further evidence of my mental decline. As they filed out of the dining room, Claire's words echoed in my head. "The old lady won't last much longer." I remained seated at the table long after they'd gone, surrounded by the remnants of our family dinner, a dinner I had spent all day preparing, making each of their favorites: the pot roast for Michael, the scalloped potatoes for David, the apple pie for Claire. None of them had commented on the food. None of them had offered to help clean up. Slowly, I began gathering the plates, wincing as my arthritic fingers gripped the heavy stoneware. As I loaded the dishwasher, memories flooded back. Claire's first steps across this very kitchen floor, Michael learning to ride a bike in the driveway, David's high school graduation party in the backyard. I had given them everything, and now I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a problem to be solved, an old lady to be tucked away and forgotten. But as I wiped down the dining room table, something shifted inside me. The hurt began to crystallize into something harder, something stronger. Claire was right about one thing. I wouldn't last forever. None of us do. But I wasn't done living yet. Not by a long shot. That night, I sat at George's old desk and wrote 3 letters, one for each of my children. I sealed them in envelopes with trembling hands but resolute heart. Tomorrow, they would each receive their letter, and nothing would ever be the same again. As I turned out the light and climbed into bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose. Claire thought I was just a frail old woman ready for the scrap heap. She had no idea what I was capable of. None of them did. But they were about to find out. The next morning, I woke before dawn, a lifetime of early rising ingrained in my bones. The house was quiet, the same house where I'd spent 38 years of my life, raised 3 children, and buried my husband. Soon, it would belong to someone else. I made my coffee strong and carried it to the porch, watching the sun slowly paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My neighbor Elaine waved from her garden, and I raised my mug in greeting. She had no idea my world had collapsed yesterday, that my own children had essentially written me off as already dead. The postal carrier would deliver my letters today. I imagined the expressions on my children's faces as they read what I'd written, not anger or accusations. I was beyond that now, just truth, plain and simple. By 9 o'clock, I was dressed and ready. I'd made an appointment with Howard Abernathy, my old friend and attorney. George had always handled our legal matters, but after his death, I'd had to learn quickly. Howard had been kind, explaining everything clearly without making me feel stupid. Unlike my children, he never assumed my age equated to incompetence. "Marcia, this is quite a change of plans," Howard said, reviewing the documents I'd placed before him. His office smelled of leather and wood polish, comforting in its old-fashioned formality. "Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied, my voice steady. "Can you make it happen?" Howard removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. "Yes, but it will require some maneuvering. The house is in your name, so legally you don't need your children's permission to sell it. But they'll notice when the proceeds don't match what they're expecting." "I'm counting on it," I said with a small smile. "I want everything to be legal and transparent. I just don't want them to know until it's done." "And the new trust arrangements?" "Exactly as I've outlined. They'll each receive a portion, but with conditions, and not a penny before I'm gone." Howard nodded slowly. "You realize they'll be angry." I thought of Claire's cold eyes, Michael's averted gaze, David's awkward silence. "They already are, Howard. They just don't know who they're angry at." 2 hours later, I left Howard's office with a renewed sense of purpose. The wheels were in motion. The house would be listed with a different realtor than Claire's friend, at a slightly lower price to ensure a quick sale. A significant portion of the proceeds would be placed in a special account that only I could access. The rest would go into trusts for my children, with specific conditions for each. My next stop was the bank. Stella Jenkins had been my teller for 15 years, and she'd recently been promoted to branch manager. "Mrs. Wilson, what a lovely surprise," she greeted me warmly. "How can I help you today?" "I need to make some changes to my accounts," I explained. "And I'll need your absolute discretion." Stella's expression grew serious. "Of course. Let's go to my office." Inside the private room, I laid out my financial situation. George and I had always lived frugally, saving where we could. The children knew about our main accounts, but they had no idea about the small inheritance I'd received from my Aunt Josephine 10 years ago, money I'd kept separate and never touched. "I'd like to close my joint accounts and open new ones, in my name only," I told Stella. "And I'd like to access the funds in the safety deposit box." If Stella was surprised, she didn't show it. She simply nodded and began the paperwork. By the time I left the bank, I had consolidated my resources and gained complete control over my finances for the first time in my adult life. My phone rang as I was driving home. Claire. I let it go to voicemail. Then Michael called. Then David. They must have received the letters. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, gathering my strength. My letter to each of them had been simple. I was selling the house as they wished, but I would be handling my own affairs moving forward. I thanked them for their concern, but assured them I was quite capable of managing my life. I did not mention their cruel words or their plans to ship me off to a facility. I simply stated facts. The messages they left were predictably self-centered. Claire. "Mom, what is this letter? We need to talk about the house. Call me back immediately." Michael. Hey, Mom, got your letter. We should probably discuss this as a family. Claire's pretty upset. David. Mom, are you okay? Claire's freaking out. She says you're being manipulated. Please call me. Of course. Claire assumed someone must be manipulating me. The idea that I might make decisions for myself never occurred to her. Inside the house, I went straight to the study and opened George's filing cabinet. After his death, I'd organized everything meticulously. Insurance policies, property deeds, tax returns. I pulled out the folder labeled Personal Effects and began making a list of items to keep, sell, or donate. The grandfather clock would go to an auction house, the antique dining set too. The jewelry George had given me over the years, some of it quite valuable, would be appraised and sold, except for my wedding band and the sapphire earrings my mother had left me. As I worked, a strange calm settled over me. For decades, I had defined myself as George's wife, as Claire, Michael, and David's mother. My needs, my dreams, my identity had all been subsumed by these roles. Now, at 64, I was finally becoming just Marcia again. My phone kept ringing throughout the day. I ignored it. Tomorrow would be soon enough to face their questions and demands. Tonight was for me, for my plans, my future. The old lady won't last much longer, Claire had said. She was right, in a way. The old Marcia, the doormat, the people-pleaser, the self-sacrificing mother, she wouldn't last much longer. In her place, a new woman was emerging, one who understood her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. By nightfall, I had filled 3 boxes with items to keep and labeled everything else for sale or donation. I ordered Chinese takeout, something I rarely did, and ate it straight from the carton while watching a travel show about coastal Portugal. That looks nice, I said aloud to the empty room. Watching the sun set over the Atlantic in vibrant oranges and purples. Very nice indeed. My phone buzzed again. Claire. For the 12th time. This time I picked up. What do you mean you've already listed the house? Claire's voice rose to a pitch I hadn't heard since she was a teenager denied permission to attend a concert. With some discount realtor? Mom, are you trying to throw away money? I held the phone slightly away from my ear, sipping my morning tea calmly. Good morning to you too, Claire. The realtor is highly recommended and his commission is reasonable. But Jenny was going to list it. She specializes in luxury properties. Jenny, Claire's college roommate, whose commission would have been 2% higher than standard. I'd done my research. I've made my decision, I said firmly. The listing went live yesterday. There was a moment of stunned silence before Claire recovered. Why didn't you discuss this with us first? I didn't realize I needed permission to sell my own house. That's not... Claire sputtered. We're just trying to help you, Mom. You don't understand the real estate market. I thought of the investment property George and I had purchased in the 1980s, which had quadrupled in value by the time we sold it to pay for the children's college education. But Claire had been too young to remember that. The house will sell quickly at this price, I said. And that's what matters to me. What about the furniture, the antiques, Dad's collections? Her voice had taken on an accusatory edge. I'm keeping a few sentimental items. The rest will be sold at auction next week. The silence that followed was so prolonged I thought we'd been disconnected. Mom, Claire finally said, her voice unnaturally controlled. I think we need to talk about your mental state. This impulsive behavior is neither impulsive nor a sign of mental decline, I interrupted. I've made a careful plan, Claire. I'm simply executing it. What plan? Where will you even go? I haven't decided yet, I said, which wasn't entirely true. I had some very specific ideas, but I'll have plenty of options once the house sells. Claire made a noise of exasperation. I'm coming over. Today. We need to talk face to face. I won't be home, I said. I have appointments all day. Another lie. I'd be at Elaine's house across the street, hiding like a teenager breaking curfew. We'd planned to have lunch and play cards. Elaine, a widow herself, had been horrified when I told her about my children's behavior. Tomorrow then, Claire insisted, and I'm bringing Michael and David. Fine, I agreed. Dinner at 6. Don't bring food. I'll cook. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and allowed myself one deep, shuddering breath. Standing up to Claire had never been my strong suit. George had always said she got her stubbornness from me, but I'd never seen it. To me, she had always been a force of nature. Beautiful, brilliant, and utterly unstoppable. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw a young couple on my porch, looking around appreciatively at my flower beds. "Hello?" I said, opening the door cautiously. "Mrs. Wilson? I'm Tracy Lopez, and this is my husband Miguel. We're so sorry to drop by unannounced, but we just saw your house listing online, and we were driving through the neighborhood and thought, well, it doesn't hurt to ask if we could take a quick look." They were in their early 30s, with the eager, slightly desperate look of first-time homebuyers. Tracy was visibly pregnant. "The realtor should be handling showings," I said hesitantly. "We know, and we've already called him to schedule officially," Miguel explained. "But we've been outbid on 3 houses already, and when we saw yours," he looked at his wife with obvious affection, "we just had a feeling about it." I thought about what Claire would say, how these people were probably trying to scam me, how I shouldn't let strangers into the house, how I was being naive. Then I looked at Tracy's hopeful face and the protective way Miguel held her hand. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I'll give you a quick tour." As I showed them around the house where I'd spent nearly 4 decades of my life, I found myself sharing little stories. How the scratch on the kitchen doorframe marked Claire's height at 10, how the stain on the living room ceiling resulted from Michael's science experiment gone wrong, how the crooked bathroom tile was from when David tried to help George with renovations. "It's a wonderful home," Tracy said softly as we finished in the backyard. "You can feel how much love is in these walls." "Yes," I agreed, surprised by the lack of sadness I felt. But now it's time for a new family to make their own memories here. After they left, promising to return with their realtor for an official showing, I went to the old secretary desk in the living room. Inside the top drawer was a leather-bound journal George had given me on our 30th anniversary. I'd never written in it, always too busy with everyone else's needs to record my own thoughts. I opened it to the first blank page and began to write. Today, I showed my house to a young couple. The woman is expecting their first child. They looked at this place and saw a beginning. For so long, I've only been able to see endings. 3 days later, my house was under contract. Tracy and Miguel Lopez had indeed returned with their realtor and made an offer just slightly above asking price. Their letter, explaining how they'd fallen in love with the home and could envision raising their family there, had sealed the deal for me, despite my realtor suggesting we wait for more offers. When I told my children at our dinner, Claire's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: shock, anger, disbelief, and finally, calculation. "How much?" she demanded, her fork hovering midway to her mouth. I named the figure. "That's it?" she nearly shouted. "Mom, that's at least $50,000 below market value. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking it's my house, and I can sell it to whomever I choose, for whatever price we agree on," I replied calmly, passing the salad to David. "But that's our inheritance you're just giving away," Claire sputtered. And there it was, the truth, finally spoken aloud. "Your inheritance?" I repeated softly. I wasn't aware I had died. Michael choked slightly on his water, and David suddenly became very interested in his napkin. "You know what I mean," Claire said, flustered. "That money was supposed to be for all of us. Eventually." "And what about me?" I asked. "What was supposed to be for me right now, while I'm still very much alive?" Claire had no answer for that. "The nursing home," I supplied for her. "Isn't that right? A place where I wouldn't be a burden on any of you." "Mom," Michael started, but I held up my hand. "The house will close in 30 days, I said firmly. "And then each of you will receive a check for $20,000. The rest is mine." The silence that followed was deafening. 6 months can change everything. The Lopez family had been living in my old house for nearly 5 months now. Tracy had given birth to a beautiful baby girl, and they'd sent me a photo with a thank you note. "Emma's nursery used to be your sewing room. We think of you often and hope you're happy in your new life." My new life. It still felt strange to think of it that way. After the closing, I'd moved into a small furnished rental while I figured out my next steps. My children had been in various states of shock, anger, and disbelief when I'd handed them each a check for $20,000. Far less than they'd expected, but more than nothing. "This is it?" Claire had asked, staring at the check as if it might suddenly add a zero. "This is it," I'd confirmed. Consider it a gift. But what about the rest? Michael had pressed. The house sold for almost $300,000. The rest is mine, I'd said simply. For my future. They'd tried everything after that. Guilt, anger, even bringing in a lawyer to see if they could contest my decision. But Howard had made sure everything was airtight. The house had been solely in my name, and I was of sound mind. The money was mine to do with as I pleased. And what had pleased me was something none of them could have imagined. "Are you sure about this, Marcia?" Elaine had asked when I'd first shared my plan with her. "It's so unexpected. That's exactly why I need to do it," I'd replied. "I've spent my entire life being exactly who everyone expected me to be. Now it's my turn." The memory brought a smile to my face as I adjusted my new sun hat and gazed out at the glittering blue ocean before me. The small cafe table wobbled slightly as I reached for my coffee, the warm sea breeze carrying the scent of salt and jasmine. "More coffee, Ms. Wilson?" asked Miguel, the owner of the small beachside cafe where I'd become a regular. "Yes, please," I replied. "And perhaps one of those delicious pastries." "Of course." He smiled warmly. "Working on your painting again today?" I nodded, gesturing to the small easel set up beside my table. "The light is perfect this morning." Who would have thought that Marcia Wilson, dutiful wife and mother, would discover a passion for watercolor painting at 64? Certainly not my children, and honestly, not even me. But the art class I'd impulsively signed up for at the community center during my last month in the rental had awakened something in me, a joy. A sense of possibility I hadn't felt in decades. And when the instructor had mentioned the artists' colony in this small coastal town, something had clicked. I'd gone home that night and looked up real estate listings. A week later, I'd put a deposit on a tiny cottage just 2 blocks from the beach. My phone buzzed beside my coffee cup. David, my youngest. Unlike Claire and Michael, who had essentially stopped speaking to me after realizing I wasn't going to change my mind about the money, David still called occasionally. "Hey, Mom," he said when I answered. "Just checking in. How's wherever you are?" I still hadn't told any of them exactly where I'd moved. Not out of spite, but because I knew they wouldn't understand. They'd try to talk me out of it, tell me I was being foolish, that I needed to be near them as I aged. "I'm wonderful, David," I replied truthfully. "How are you? How's work?" We chatted for a few minutes about his job and his new girlfriend before he cleared his throat uncomfortably. Claire's been asking about you," he said. "She won't call you herself, you know how she is, but I think she's worried. Worried about me or worried about her inheritance?" I asked, more sharply than I'd intended. David sighed. "That's not fair, Mom. She just doesn't understand why you suddenly changed everything. None of us do." I watched a seagull dive into the waves, emerging with a small fish. "It wasn't sudden for me, David. It was a lifetime coming." After we hung up, I returned to my painting, trying to capture the way the sunlight danced on the water. My technique was still developing, but my instructor said I had a natural eye. 3 of my smaller pieces were already displayed in the local gallery, price tags modestly attached. "Marcia, there you are!" I looked up to see Eleanor, my neighbor from the artists' colony, approaching with her usual exuberance. At 72, she had more energy than most people half her age, her silver hair always escaping its braid, her clothes splattered with paint. "We're having an impromptu gathering at my place tonight," she announced, pulling up a chair without waiting for an invitation. "Sarah sold her sculpture series to that gallery in San Francisco, and we're celebrating. You'll come, of course." It wasn't really a question. That was Eleanor's way. She simply assumed everyone wanted to be part of the vibrant community she'd helped create among the eclectic group of artists, writers, and retirees who populated our small coastal haven. 6 months ago, I would have made an excuse. I would have worried about imposing, about not fitting in, about a dozen different imagined scenarios where I somehow embarrassed myself. The old Marcia had been so careful, so concerned with doing the right thing, with meeting others' expectations. "I'd love to," I said instead. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself," Eleanor replied with a wave of her hand. "And maybe that blackberry cobbler you made last week. It was divine." As Eleanor chatted about the evening's plans, I felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it almost brought tears to my eyes. In just 6 months, I had more genuine friendships here than I'd developed in decades in my old life. People who saw me, really saw me, not as George's wife or as Claire, Michael and David's mother, but as Marcia. Marcia who painted seascapes. Marcia who made excellent blackberry cobbler. Marcia who was finally living for herself. My phone buzzed with a text message. Howard, my attorney. Papers are ready for your review. The trust is set up exactly as you requested. Call when convenient. Another piece falling into place. The sale of the house had given me enough to buy my small cottage outright and live comfortably, if modestly. But I'd also had that inheritance from Aunt Josephine, which had grown significantly over the years through careful investment. And there was the life insurance policy from George, which the children knew nothing about. I'd asked Howard to set up trusts for each of my children, trusts they wouldn't know about until after my death. The money would be distributed with specific conditions, not out of spite or a desire to control them from beyond the grave, but from a place of love and hope that they might learn what had taken me 64 years to understand, that life is meant to be lived authentically, on one's own terms. Earth to Marcia, Eleanor said, waving her hand in front of my face. You drifted off there for a moment. Just thinking about how much has changed, I replied with a smile. 6 months ago, I was a different person. Eleanor studied me with knowing eyes. No, dear, you were always this person. You just finally gave yourself permission to live as her. That evening, as I walked the short path to Eleanor's cottage, blackberry cobbler in hand and the ocean breeze in my hair, I thought about Claire's cruel words that had set everything in motion. The old lady won't last much longer. She'd been right, in a way. The old Marcia, the one who'd lived her life for everyone but herself, was gone. In her place stood a woman who was just beginning to discover who she really was, and she planned to last for quite some time. I was in the middle of teaching my first beginner's watercolor class at the community center when I saw them. Through the large windows overlooking the parking lot, I watched as Claire stepped out of her luxury SUV, sunglasses shielding her eyes from the coastal sun. Michael was right behind her, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt that seemed too formal for our laid-back beach town. Only David was missing. My heart stuttered in my chest, but I kept my voice steady as I guided my students through a simple ocean sunset technique. Remember to let the colors blend naturally at the horizon line, I said, moving between easels. Don't overthink it. Marcia, there are some people asking for you at the front desk, whispered Judy, the center's coordinator, slipping into the room. They say they're your children. I nodded, unsurprised. The class ends in 15 minutes. They can wait. Judy raised her eyebrows but didn't question me. In the 10 months I'd lived here, I'd never mentioned having children. Then again, there was a lot my new friends didn't know about my previous life. For the remaining 15 minutes, I focused entirely on my students, helping an elderly gentleman correct his brush technique and praising a young mother's surprisingly skilled rendering of waves. All the while, I could feel the weight of the impending confrontation pressing on my shoulders. When class ended, I cleaned my brushes methodically, taking my time. I wasn't avoiding them, exactly. I was just preparing. Mom, Claire's voice cut through the empty classroom. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking so much like her teenage self that it almost made me smile. Almost. Claire, I acknowledged, drying my hands on a paper towel. Michael, this is a surprise. Is it? Claire's voice was sharp. You disappeared, changed your phone number, moved without telling anyone where you were going. What did you expect? I expected to be allowed to live my life, I replied calmly. And I didn't disappear. David has my new number. I speak to him every few weeks. Michael shifted uncomfortably. David wouldn't tell us where you were, said you made him promise. Then how did you find me? Claire's mouth tightened. We hired someone. You hired a private investigator to track down your own mother? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. We were worried about you, Claire exclaimed, her voice rising. You suddenly sell the house, move away without telling anyone where you're going, start giving away money. Giving away money? I interrupted. What are you talking about? Michael stepped forward. The checks, Mom. $20,000 each. It wasn't like you. I stared at them. truly stunned. That wasn't giving away money. That was giving you each a fair portion of the house sale. Less than you expected, perhaps, but hardly charity. That's not, Claire began, then stopped herself. Look, we didn't come here to argue about money. Then why did you come? Claire? I asked quietly. Why track me down after nearly a year of silence? The question hung in the air between us. Through the window, I could see my students dispersing. Some heading toward the beach with their finished paintings, others to the small cafe across the street. My new life, carrying on just outside, while my old one confronted me within these walls. Because you're our mother, Michael finally said, his voice softer than Claire's. And we miss you. Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. Michael, my middle child, had always been the peacemaker, caught between Claire's forceful personality and David's quiet rebellion. Now there was a vulnerability in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Do you? I asked, not unkindly. Miss me? Or miss what I provided? Claire made an impatient sound. This is exactly why we've been worried. You've changed. Mom, you're not yourself. No, Claire, I said firmly. For the first time in decades, I am myself. That's what you don't understand. I gestured around the classroom, to the students' paintings drying on the racks, to my own work displayed on the walls. Seascapes and local landmarks that had earned me a small but growing reputation in our artist community. This is me, the real me. Not just George's wife or your mother, but Marcia, a woman with her own passions, her own dreams. But why did you have to move so far away? Michael asked. Without even telling us? I sighed, gathering my thoughts. Because I needed space to discover who I am without all of you defining me. And after what happened during that family meeting about the house, I wasn't sure you'd respect my choices. Claire flinched slightly, and I knew she remembered her cruel words. The old lady won't last much longer? I said some things I shouldn't have, she admitted reluctantly, but that doesn't justify disappearing. I didn't disappear, Claire. I moved on. There's a difference. An uncomfortable silence fell between us. Through the open door, I could hear the sounds of the community center, children laughing in the gymnasium down the hall, the gentle chime of the yoga class ending, normal life continuing all around us. We found the trust documents, Claire finally said, her voice flat. In Howard's office. My breath caught. Howard would never have shown them those documents willingly. You had no right. We were executing a power of attorney, Michael explained quickly. David forged your signature. We were trying to protect your assets. The betrayal stung, but not as much as it once might have. My assets don't need protecting, especially not from me. Why would you set up trusts that we can only access after you die? Claire demanded. With all these conditions, the conditions. Each child's trust had specific requirements. For Claire, she would receive her portion only after completing a year of volunteer work with the elderly. For Michael, his money was tied to finishing the degree he'd abandoned. For David, the youngest and most directionless, his trust required him to remain employed at the same job for at least 2 years. Stability, I hoped, would help him find purpose. Because money without meaning is just money, I said simply. I wanted to give you something more valuable. So, this is all some kind of lesson? Claire's voice dripped with disdain. You're punishing us from beyond the grave? No, Claire. I'm loving you the best way I know how. Michael looked thoughtful, but Claire shook her head in frustration. This isn't love. Mom, this is control. Is that what you think? I asked, genuine sadness washing over me. That boundaries are control? That wanting the best for you, wanting you to grow, to find purpose beyond material wealth, is somehow a punishment? What I think, Claire said, her voice tight with emotion, is that you abandoned your family on some selfish journey of self-discovery, left us wondering if you were even alive, and now we find out you've been hiding money, setting up secret trusts with ridiculous stipulations, playing puppet master with our lives. Claire, Michael started, but she cut him off. No, Michael, I'm done. If Mom wants to live in her little fantasy world painting seagulls by the beach, let her. I have a real life to get back to. She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving Michael and me in stunned silence. I should go after her, he said after a moment, but he didn't move. She'll cool down, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. Claire had always been the most like her father, stubborn, Principled and slow to forgive perceived slights. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. The trusts, they're actually kind of brilliant, especially mine. I looked at him in surprise. I've been thinking about going back to school, he admitted. For a while now, just couldn't justify the expense. A small smile tugged at my lips. The money will be there when you're ready. No pressure. He nodded, then glanced toward the door Claire had stormed through. I should really go. She drove. Of course. He hesitated, then stepped forward and gave me an awkward hug. You look good, Mom. Happy. I am, I said softly. I really am. After he left, I stood alone in the classroom, surrounded by the colorful evidence of my new life. The confrontation had been painful, yes, but also clarifying. Claire might never understand my choices. Michael might be beginning to. And David, well, David had kept my secret all this time, even from his siblings. My family was changing, reforming into something new, just like me. My 65th birthday dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains of my bedroom window. I stretched lazily, savoring the moment. Birthdays had never been particularly special in my married life, usually just a quiet dinner with George, perhaps a small gift. The children would call if they remembered. Today felt different. Today felt like a celebration, not of growing older, but of growing into myself. I padded barefoot to the kitchen and made coffee, carrying my mug out to the small porch that faced the ocean. My cottage was nothing like the spacious suburban home I'd shared with George, but every inch of it was mine, filled with things that brought me joy. Books I actually had time to read, art supplies, colorful cushions, and quirky finds from local shops. The porch had become my favorite spot, a place to watch the ever-changing sea and sky. I'd set up a small table where I often painted or wrote in my journal. Today, a wrapped package sat on it, tied with a blue ribbon. Puzzled, I set down my coffee and examined the gift. The tag simply read, "For Marcia, on her day of liberation, E. Eleanor, of course. My free-spirited neighbor had a flair for the dramatic. I untied the ribbon and carefully removed the wrapping paper to reveal a leather-bound book. Opening it, I found blank pages, save for a handwritten note on the first page. For your next chapter, may it be even more beautiful than the last. Happy birthday. Beneath it were signatures, dozens of them, my neighbors, my painting students, the barista at the cafe who always remembered my order, the gallery owner who'd first displayed my work, all the people who had become my community in the past year. Tears pricked at my eyes, but they were the good kind, the kind that came from being seen and valued. My phone chimed with a text message. David, happy birthday, Mom. Sorry I can't be there today, but your gift is on its way. Love you. Then another chime. Michael, happy birthday. Wanted you to know I registered for classes, starting this fall. Nothing from Claire, but I hadn't expected anything. Our confrontation 3 months ago had left a wound that would take time to heal, if it ever did. I was just finishing my coffee when I heard a car pull up. Through the seagrass that lined my walkway, I could see a taxi stopping at my gate. For a moment, I thought perhaps it was Eleanor, arriving early for the small gathering she'd insisted on hosting for me later. But then the back door opened, and David stepped out, grinning widely. Surprise, he called, lugging a duffel bag over his shoulder. I rushed down the steps to meet him, joy bubbling up inside me. David, you said you couldn't come. He wrapped me in a hug, lifting me slightly off my feet. At 35, he was the tallest of my children, with George's build and my unruly curls. And miss my mom's big day? No way. Inside, as I made him breakfast, some things never change. Mothers always feed their children no matter how old they are. David filled me in on his life. He'd been at the same job for 8 months now, a record for him, working as a coordinator for a nonprofit that helped veterans transition to civilian life. It's good work, he said, attacking his pancakes with enthusiasm. Makes me feel like I'm doing something that matters, you know? I did know. That feeling had eluded me for most of my adult life, only finding it now, in my 60s. How's your painting going? He asked. Michael said your stuff is selling in that local gallery. I nodded, unable to hide my pride. 3 pieces last month. Nothing expensive, but it's a start. That's amazing, Mom, really. His genuine happiness for me warmed my heart. Of my 3 children, David had been the quickest to accept my transformation, perhaps because he himself had always been searching for his own path. So, he said a bit too casually, I might have invited someone else to your birthday dinner. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, Michael's driving down. Should be here by 4. I smiled, pleased. That's wonderful. I wasn't sure if— And Claire, he added quickly, then winced at my expression. I know. But she wants to come, Mom. I didn't pressure her, I swear. Claire? Coming here willingly? After the things she'd said? I wasn't sure whether to be hopeful or anxious. Did she say why? I asked carefully. David shrugged. Just that she didn't want to miss your birthday. Look, I know she was harsh the last time, but she's been different lately. Quieter. I think she might be ready to really talk. I nodded slowly. Well, it's your risk. You're the one who'll have to drive back with her if things go badly. He grinned. Always the optimist, Mom. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant blur. David and I walked along the beach, collecting shells and talking about everything and nothing. I showed him my newest paintings in the small studio space I'd set up in what was supposed to be the cottage's second bedroom. This one's my favorite, he said, pointing to a watercolor of an elderly couple walking hand in hand along the shoreline, their backs to the viewer, facing a brilliant sunset. That's Eleanor and her late husband, I explained. I painted it from a photograph she showed me, their 50th anniversary, just a year before he passed. It's beautiful, David said softly. You can feel the love between them. By 4 o'clock, as promised, Michael's car pulled into my driveway. I watched from the porch as he emerged, followed by Claire. She looked different somehow, less polished than usual, her hair in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans instead of her customary tailored slacks. Happy birthday, Mom, Michael said, hugging me warmly. Place looks great. Claire hung back, her expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, she stepped forward and handed me a small, wrapped package. Happy birthday, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Thank you, I replied, genuinely touched. I'm glad you came. Inside the package was a silver frame holding a photograph I'd never seen before. Me, much younger, laughing as I pushed Claire on a swing. I must have been in my 30s. Claire no more than 5 or 6. Dad took it, Claire explained, watching my face. I found a box of old photos when I was cleaning out my storage unit. It's wonderful, I said softly. I don't remember ever seeing it. There's a letter too, she said, nodding toward the package. But maybe read it later. I nodded, setting the frame carefully on my side table. We have a little time before we need to head to Eleanor's for dinner. Would you like some tea? Or maybe a walk on the beach? To my surprise, it was Claire who answered. A walk would be nice. The brothers exchanged glances but made no move to join us. This conversation, they seemed to understand, needed to happen between Claire and me alone. We walked in silence for a while, the wet sand firm beneath our feet, the sound of waves a soothing backdrop. Finally, Claire spoke. I've been seeing a therapist, she said abruptly. Since we found you here. I glanced at her, surprised. Claire had always dismissed therapy as paying someone to tell you what you want to hear. She's helped me understand some things, Claire continued, eyes fixed on the horizon, about why I was so angry when you left, why I said those terrible things about you not lasting much longer, about the nursing home. I waited, letting her find her words. I was afraid, she admitted, her voice barely audible over the surf. Afraid of losing you, afraid of you not needing me anymore. It was easier to push you away first than to be abandoned. Oh, Claire, I said gently, I never abandoned you. I just finally started living for myself, too. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I know that now, but at the time, it felt like rejection, like you were choosing yourself over us. It wasn't an either-or choice, I explained. I can love you and still love myself enough to want happiness. We walked a bit further, both processing. The trust, Claire said eventually. The one you set up for me, with the condition about working with the elderly. I tensed slightly. Yes? I started volunteering at a retirement community near my apartment, just 2 days a week, reading to residents, helping with activities. I stopped walking, turning to face her. Really? She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Really? And the weird thing is, I like it. These people have amazing stories. They're not just old people waiting to die. They're vibrant and funny and wise. Yes, I said simply. We are. Claire's smile widened at my deliberate use of we, acknowledging my own age. I'm starting to understand why you did what you did, Mom. All of it. The house, the move, the trusts. You wanted us to see what you've discovered. That it's never too late to find purpose, to live authentically. That's exactly it, I said, my heart swelling with hope. That's all I've ever wanted for all three of you. As we turned to walk back toward the cottage, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, almost identical to the watercolor sunset I'd taught my students to paint just months earlier. I'm sorry, Claire said quietly, for what I said that day, about you not lasting.